Hi, Nick. So I have one question for you.
What?
Why do people hate consultants? And by consultants, I mean specifically the management consultants, the big three.
All right, something like the big three.
Something like the big
So-
three, and including the top 20, top 50, whatever the consultants that coming in to get hired into a Fortune 500 in a long extended period of time, and when they leave, something drastic typically happens.
Well, to be all fair, I married a management consultant. Mixed bag on that one. But, all right, I think you could boil it down. Look at it from the employer's perspective, look at it from the employee's perspective. Number one, they're incredibly expensive for what you get. Incredibly expensive. To the point where if you were a small or mid-sized business, you would look at the price and balk and say, there's no way that I'm going to pay somebody to do these things and have my people provide most of the information so someone can put it in a pretty slide deck and give it to me. That's just money that's not going to get spent. And if it's a capability that we don't have in-house, it's just not going to get done, period. Now, when you get to a large organization, suddenly money becomes a little more flexible. And as a leader, you got to look at it and go, what am I actually getting? Because there's a very high cost for, let's say, a month's worth of engagement. What is that, $2 million, $3 million
So-
for a 6-person team?
Yeah,
What,
something like
something-
that. So
give me an example.
So a range for a senior consultant, the people that actually, gather the data, talk to the people, put the slide deck together, their ongoing rate is roughly about $500 an hour.
Okay.
And for the senior managing director, the one that is client facing, that is coming into the business and talk to the CEOs, their ongoing rate is somewhere in the 1 to 5K an hour.
Okay. So what you're telling me is if I have a team internally, I'm going to pay what I pay annually for that team internally in about 2 weeks, maybe 3.
Something like that, yes.
Something like that, or absolutely like that?
I'm trying to give it a grace because
I'm
not
just trying
all,
to say, like,
yeah.
this is the worst case scenario. So we're already up against, this is a massive investment, right? What am I going to get for this? I'm going to get a bunch of frameworks from people who don't understand my business. They say they understand my business, but how many people in consulting in any specialty organization actually have worked in the industry which they're consulting for?
Very few.
Okay. So people who don't actually understand my business, who aren't actually generating the data, are going to put these things into a slide deck. And my team is going to look at that and say, now I have a person between me and my leadership who's taking credit for my work. I give you a good example that I experienced where after an engagement, my boss sits down and is going through all of these things that going forward we're going to, and then giving me a good lesson about how there was a problem on a particular project, and the correct way was to go to the project manager on the customer side, on the client side, and engage with them on this and resolve the action. And after that speech, I just stopped and go, that was me. I did that. And he was shocked because it was in the slide deck as something of a corrective action that the consultants took who weren't involved in that particular act, weren't involved in either the problem or the resolution, or in recapturing the value from the errors on that project. I had made those corrections and I had put it straight. They package it as part of their solution, which is fine because they've already bottled it up and they've moved on. But I can see why for some people who don't have face-to-face with leadership, their work product they believe is now no longer their own. Now, I give you a flip side on every single one of those. Right.
So in other words, you dislike consultants because they typically have very few industry knowledge, and they they took the expertise of the industry person that had, and then by the time that a
Bundle
problem
it into their own solution.
right, by the time that the problem of the solution occur, they have already moved on to the next engagement, leaving the industry person, the person that is in the organization, to be held accountable to something that they have no control
Well,
over.
that's another issue entirely. I'm just speaking about the perception that a team member might have that they are now being separated from their leadership. They now have a middleman or an intermediary who is now getting the credit for their work, rightly or wrongly. Or maybe that's not even what's actually happened, but that can be the perception for teams that are supporting consultants. I mean, they're putting a lot of work in a very short sprint for what is ultimately getting packaged and presented by another team. And I'm just giving a personal anecdote of how that can be perceived.
But
Now, forget the fact that they're not implementers and
Right.
that they're creating something that, whether or not it actually succeeds, they're not going to take fault for the failures.
so consulting is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the US. Across the globe, it's even more. So if that is the case, why do big Fortune 500 companies tend to hire consultants to do the work, if not for the industry
I'll
expertise?
give you a very recent example. We just finished up with an engagement with a consultant, 4 weeks, to do a project that, number one, we're perfectly capable of doing in-house. Number two, most of the math, most of the strategy was developed within our organization. Could we have done it in the time frame allotted in a way that leadership would have perceived as accurate and actionable? Debatable. You've seen my slides. What is it you usually say about my slides?
They're crap.
No, she says that they're acceptable for industry standards. Acceptable for industry standards.
Yes, yes. They are. You make slides like an engineer makes slides.
Gee, I wonder why. So we've established that my slides are functional, and within my realm of expertise, people, number one, accept them as accurate and accept them as something actionable from a business perspective.
Yes.
Now, enter into a crisis or enter into a huge shift in strategy or need, where you have multiple teams working together, each vying for influence on something that none of them truly control, and leadership who doesn't necessarily know which one's most accurate or not and has to make a decision. Now the frameworks come in. Now a team who's independent and outside can come in, put together a 60-page deck within a week or two, have it actually tell a cohesive story with the data from all and the decisions from all of these teams with differing interests, who maybe in a few months could have put something together reasonably certain, but certainly not in a couple of weeks. So what leadership is paying for in this situation is, number one, headcount and speed.
And professionalism and the beautiful slides.
Oh, okay. She had to just. My slides are industry standard. Okay. That being said, they're presented in such a way that hopefully they're as concise and authoritative as possible, that, hey, this third party came in, we vetted all of these other teams that have put this all together, and we're telling you they're correct, or this is the way that we should go.
Yes.
Problem with that. So let's counterpoint to that. It's very easy for, and this is a common complaint, it's very easy for executives to hire consultants to come up with the result that the executive wants to occur. So because they're putting together the framework, and because they don't necessarily understand the business as well as someone who's doing it on a daily basis does, it's very easy for them to come to the conclusion and work backwards from the conclusion, rather than like what the answer should be, and then moving backwards to the steps to find that answer.
Not to mention that there is an incentive issue because the leaders that bring the consultants in are the sponsors and the ones that is flipping the bill.
And so that's another issue number 2 is, what is your interest, right? I'm not going to say conflict of interest, but what is the interest of the consultant? The interest of the consultant from the customer side is we want an independent eye to come in and either validate or come up with a way to do something in our business that we wouldn't have thought of or been able to do in a period of time for ourselves. From the consultant's point of view, their work product is a successful enough engagement to come up with follow-on services. Follow-on services. And this is a little bit distinct from, say, a specialty consultant who's working on a very narrow and specific
Like an
task.
IT consultant.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is
Strategy consulting.
I'm trying not to be cynical. From the cynical point of view is you want to get dug in like a tick and then never detach. From a consultant's perspective is once we've established value in a certain vertical, we're going to either expand on that vertical within the organization or expand across horizontally into other departments that necessarily have that same inefficiency. But from a business perspective, you just cost me the same amount as a 6-person team in 4 weeks. And so the more they expand, the more inefficient their use becomes over time. Eventually, ideally, there's either a hard limit and a hard budget on what you should be spending on them, or leadership changes, the relationship resets to a new management consulting group. The old one's kicked out, and the new one starts the process all over again. Is that about right?
So it's only fair to mention why do young MBAs and people with prestigious backgrounds want to come into the consultant in the first place. They want to come into the consultant because it looks good on the resume, and also it does teach you some useful skills. Number one, the reason why they want to become the expert, why they can become the expert, is because they do have years of research and cross-pollinated across different clients in order to get the information. The other part is that consultants are very good with structure and frameworks.
That's it. That's the value. They're experientially deficient. They're fresh out of college. They've had zero practical experience in the industries in which they're working. You accept that as a given. Framework and structure and thinking. That's the value that they provide, no matter what the engagement is. Because we don't teach people structure and framework in an organization. We teach them to do a job. We teach them to do a series of tasks that hopefully roll up into some greater value on say, a team. Like pick any given team, right? Pick
product management.
Had to pick product management. Let's pick another team.
Marketing campaign.
Okay, go ahead.
Customer experience.
But
I already picked 3.
Right, we have all of these different teams that have all of these different business functions, and you're going to have 5 or 6 people on these teams, each of them who has a basic understanding of their own specific function on that team. For example, business analytics on a team. What are they going to provide?
Business insights.
Okay. Based off of what?
Based on existing internal data.
Right. But let's say we go beyond, say, the typical business cycle. What separates a good BA from a great BA?
The ability to use data to tell a story and to compel action.
But that's the difference between a great and a good. The goods will take a business question and provide a business answer. And it's usually on a cadence, right? Mm-hmm. And it's usually to a very specific ask that is repetitive. Now, the work itself may or may not be competitive. They may have to come up with novel ways of getting that information or calculating it, or come up with a new way of addressing a similar problem in one business unit to another. But at the end of the day, it's a very similar, narrow perspective. And unless they're great at what they do, they're not building it into easily repeatable frameworks to take a crisis or a very difficult problem and break it down into base components and solve it quickly and efficiently. They're not doing that. You've trained a bunch of kids out of college who are
already smart.
I was going to have relatively high intellectual capacity and train them to be computers who are, while don't understand what it is they're necessarily looking at or what the downstream impact is that they're looking at, they can take all those inputs, rearrange it, and put it into an output that the specialty people can actually work and execute on. Hopefully, within a few years, they've gained enough industry experience that they can cycle out.
And actually do stuff.
And then maybe they'll cycle back in with the expertise they've gained in the industry. Probably not. But the ability to think in terms of frameworks is probably the most critical component that they bring. Not probably, it is the most critical component that they bring to any business.
Well, with the disruption of AI, I think most consultants, especially the younger ones, the ones that hire to do the groundwork, is going to feel a lot of heat.
Well, you're going to see, if you haven't already, and you see it everywhere else, significant drop-off in new hires, right? Probably a lot of retention in senior leadership for a time. And eventually, they're going to age out, and either their work, overly simplified, either their work will expand to that where they're increasing headcount again, or they're going to reach an efficient model where they need a reduced headcount to meet the same engagements and needs that they're already producing. Meaning, where we used to hire 100 people right out of undergrad, we're now going to hire 80. We're going to keep the people we have now and slowly let them attrition out, and then our new headcount's going to be roughly 20% less than it was. It's pretty much what I'm seeing.
So bottom line, young people should still learn how to structure thinking, whether becoming a consultant to do that, but bottom line is that they need to learn how to problem solve innovatively and creatively.
They should be doing that anyway. They should be learning that regardless of what field they're in. Right? There's no basic consulting technique or ability that wouldn't be valuable to an individual contributor or a team leader in a large organization.
So will you make your 11-year-old become a consultant?
Absolutely not. But I will fill him full of jargon and frameworks, and hopefully as he goes into high school, he'll be able to look at problems through that kind of rigorous analytical eye.
And on that terrifying note, thank you.